I think it's a good opportunity for us to revisit the key messages round about this policy at this juncture. We're just past the halfway point of the implementation period, and it's really crucial that we get those key messages and get them right. So we're going to look this morning at the expectations of 1+2 in the secondary context. As Lauren said, it's been very much a kind of primary focus so far. And what do we do to build on what is happening in the primary schools when they come into the secondary context? We're going to address appropriate ways of delivering L3. I think there's been an awful lot of confusion round about what L3 is going to look like in both sectors, and to consider the importance of effective transition in languages, which is key to this policy working effectively. So key recommendations, you will be familiar with most of these already, but as I said, I think it's a good opportunity to revisit them just to ensure that the key messages are really, really clear. Schools offer a first additional language, that's their L2 from primary 1. And as Louise said, in most cases, that is French. A second additional language, L3, no later than primary 5. And I think it's really important to get the L2 correct before we start looking at L3. And remember that the L2 is going to be taught from primary 1 right through to primary 7 and then into the broad general education S1 to S3. And that L2 must have progression pathways into the senior phase, so it must be offered as a national qualification. So some languages are not suitable as an L2 because there are no national qualifications in, for example, Polish. Here's the word entitlement again, that's going to come up time after time. It's an entitlement for all young people right through to the end of the broad general education in S3. Planning at cluster level for effective transition with support from the local authority is crucial again to this policy being implemented effectively. What are the expectations for L2 and L3? Well, let's look at L2 first of all. As I've already said, continuity of that L2 from primary into secondary. And it must be available, as I've already said as well, as a national qualification in the senior phase. By the end of primary 7, most pupils should have achieved second level. Now, we know with the best will in the world that not all pupils are going to be at that level. That has always been an issue for us. But by the end of primary 7, most pupils should have achieved second level. And we're getting lots of questions round about this. Well, they've been doing it from primary 1. Time to get to primary 7. They've had 7 years exposure to their L2. The expectation is that they will still be at second level, but they will have greater confidence and greater depth of knowledge of the language in all the 4 skill areas. I think under the MLPS model, it tended to be very much the oral skills that were addressed, and the reading and writing tended not to be addressed so well in that model. So we will be expecting pupils to be coming up to secondary school with much more confidence in all 4 skills. Expectations for the L3, and this, as I say, has been more tricky. Schools or local authorities decide which language they want to do as an L3. There are various ways of doing this. Quite a number of schools are going for the continuum model, so that the pupils in primary schools are doing the same language across P5, P6 and P7. You do not need to adopt that model if that does not suit your local circumstances. And in a lot of instances, the L3 in primary school is very much being dictated by what happens in the secondary school, and that should not be the case. If there's a primary school, for example, that has a big Mandarin-speaking community, then their L3 in that primary school could be Mandarin. And that then does not have to apply across that whole cluster of primary schools. So it doesn't have to be on the continuum model. If it is on the continuum model, then it would be ideal if there was provision in the secondary sector to take those languages up. Because what can happen is if a primary school is doing, say let's just take for argument's sake Spanish, as their L3, Primary 5, Primary 6, Primary 7, and those pupils reach second level by the end of Primary 7, then that L3 can actually switch and become their L2 when they go into the secondary sector, provided, of course, the secondary department offers Spanish as a language. So I think there's been quite a bit of confusion, perhaps, round about that. There should be challenge, depth, and progression. So what we're looking for in the L3 is not word level or not phrase level. It has to go beyond that. There has to be some kind of depth within the L3. I've just said that. It goes beyond words and phrases, and it builds on literacy and prior language learning. As we all know, once we've got one language in our pocket, it's much easier to pick up something else because we can build on those transferable skills that we've learned in our first foreign language. And it should develop the 4 skills. So there should be the opportunity to look at text, to be able to read it, to work out cognates using the literacy skills that you've developed in your own language and also in your first foreign language. There should be the opportunity to do a bit of writing as well. And we saw that example from St Mado's, a Primary 5 pupil coming up with that. And I would reiterate exactly what Louise said. Sometimes some of my higher pupils would struggle to write accurately like that. So we need to build on those skills, and talking and listening, obviously, as well. And the L3 can look like the old MLPS model. So it could be somebody who maybe has that language in the primary school that is the person responsible for teaching that. What we are not asking of primary staff is that they take 2 languages to the same level. We are not saying that pupils at the end of Primary 7 should be at second level in French, for example, and also in Spanish. That is not what we're looking for. So those are the key sort of messages from the policy. What are the implications for implementing this? And that's always the difficulty. You can break down policy, you can take out the key messages, but how does it actually translate into practice in your own classroom? This is crucial to me. Time for effective cluster planning and working. Without this, the whole policy is going to fall flat in its face. And some of you will have good cluster arrangements already in place. A lot of the time it's down to the goodwill of staff to come to meetings after school 2 or 3 times a year to discuss their syllabus, to discuss how things are going within the primary sector. It is now crucial that that time is built in. And that time has to be found somewhere, whether it's part of an in-service day, whether it's part of your working time agreement. It is vital that we find that time to have that dialogue with our primary colleagues. There should be appropriate training to ensure effective and confident delivery in primary. There's lots of good examples of training going on across the country. The key word here is about sustainability. We need to sustain that training so that we do have confident teachers who can deliver this effectively in the primary. Some good models are starting to emerge. In one particular cluster, the secondary school actually paid the primary teachers a supported study rate. The secondary teachers were paid supported study rate as well. They ran a 10-week course to upskill the primary teachers in Spanish, so that they could take that forward. So that's one way in which the funding has been used quite creatively, rather than just buying in more resources. Louise mentioned we've had a lot of money ploughed into this initiative, and it's crucial again that that funding is sustained. The funding has gone down a bit this year, and it probably will decrease over the life of the implementation of this policy. But it's trying to make really good use of that funding. It is an ambitious programme, and if you think that's an issue, then please let us know about that as well. All the way through the policy documents, the word effective comes up time after time after time. The word sustainable comes up time after time after time. One of the other really crucial, vital aspects of this policy is effective learning and teaching in the secondary school which takes account of and builds on prior learning. So that's going to have major implications for what happens in your S1 classes and in your S1 courses. It is now not enough to throw everything out and start again. And we know under the MLPS model there was a lot of inconsistency across different primaries. I found that as well in my own cluster. Pupils would come up to me and they would say, "We didn't do any French." And I had to take that forward and find a way round about that. So it's really important, again, that we are really clear as to what is going on in our cluster primaries in terms of teaching. How demotivating would it be for that pupil from St Meadows who can produce work like that to come into S1 and to start again with the bonjour, ça va, or what's in my pencil case? So that is no longer enough to throw all that out and start again. And we've already said there must be progression pathways available for pupils into the senior phase. What does L3 look like in the secondary sector? It can be delivered in a range of ways. So it could be that you're doing the continuum model where your primary cluster are doing the same language from primary 5, 6 and 7, and then you take that forward into the secondary sector. But I'll show you in a minute other ways that you can deliver this. The introduction of the L3 should not be at the expense of the time given to L2. Now, the picture across the country is very different in different local authorities and even in individual schools. Some schools have 3 periods per week, S1 to S3. Some have 2 periods per week. If you've got 2 periods per week, then stealing a period from that to deliver an L3 is going to really dilute the experience across the board. It is crucial that the pupils still have that depth of learning in their L2, which they can then take into the senior phase. If that time's diluted, it's going to have a serious effect on attainment levels. So it shouldn't be at the expense of L2. The L3 can lead to accreditation. So you may want to look at things like the Modern Languages for Life and Work Award, or Scottish Studies Award if you're doing Gaelic. The only proviso with this is that if you're doing an award like that, you have to be GTCS registered in that language. Now there are ways round this. The Modern Languages for Life and Work Award is a really flexible award. It's made up of 3 different units. You can do one of those units in one language and you can do the other unit in a different language. So for example, in Shetland, they delivered the Modern Languages for Life and Work Award in French and Norwegian. Now, Norwegian is not one of the suite of languages offered in the Languages for Life and Work Award. But what the teacher did was when they were doing that unit, just made sure that the 2 assessments that had to be done in listening and talking were done in French, so that the pupils got the whole award at the end of the day. And we were really amazed at the progress those pupils had made in Norwegian. The teacher was learning Norwegian, and the pupils were learning along with them. It really suited their local context because of the oil industry, because of the links with the ferry to Bergen, I think. They get lots of people coming across from Norway. Their own Shetland dialect is very much rooted in that whole kind of Scandinavian language. So it really suited their context. This is an opportunity for you, it's a real frustration of mine, as the wealth of talent that sits in modern languages departments untapped. People who are qualified to teach languages that they're not able to teach in their department. This is a way of bringing in those languages and bringing them alive again and ensuring we have that diversity. It might be an opportunity to bring back German or to bring back Italian or to bring back some other language that you're qualified in. If there's a language which interests you, for example, but you're not qualified in it, then there's no reason, as long as you've done the university course, there's no reason why you can't teach that. So for example, I did Swedish for 2 years as part of my German degree. I would love to have the opportunity to actually take that forward with a group of pupils, because I think it's something that's really different, but it's also something that builds in on those skills that they have developed through their German language. If anybody wants more information about how that was done in Norwegian, come and speak to me at some point in the course of the day. And I've already said that. The only proviso for delivering those awards is that you have to be GTCS registered in those languages. So what are the possible options? So L3 is a full option to study a second language throughout the year, which is what some schools are doing. And Julianne this afternoon is going to present some case studies from 7 different schools that are all doing different models. And you can have a look at those and see if there's anything at all that you can take out of them. Lots of schools and local authorities are going down the elective masterclass, I choose route, whatever you want to call it, and are offering their L3 as an elective at any stage within the broad general education. And you'll see an example of a school which offers electives in S1 and S2 to give pupils exposure to that additional language at some point in the broad general education. And you may be saying, well, an elective, so how do we ensure that every pupil actually chooses to do that? Well, there's a wee bit of compulsory choice maybe in this. It's about how you market that. It's about how you market that additional language when you're up against things like computer gaming, or as one school was doing, murder mystery. I don't quite know what they were doing, whether they were playing Cluedo, but they might have been doing Cluedo in Spanish, why not? How do you market that up against all of these different things? One of my colleagues at SCILT is very much into outdoor learning, and you could deliver an L3 through the outdoor learning and the John Muir Award, which means that the pupils would get something out of that at the end of the day. However, all pupils must have had that exposure by the end of S3. So what that means for you is keeping an audit trail from S1 to S3 of who has chosen it. And then persuading, because we're all good at persuading, because we're all modern languages teachers, persuading pupils who have not opted into that additional language to actually take it on board. And it should be about fun, it should be about engaging activities and looking at things in a different context. And I think if we do that, we're on to a winner. One school did L3 as part of an IDL project, and what they did was the timetabler took all the S2 pupils off timetable for 6 weeks. Quite a brave thing to do, and the Modern Languages Department did all of that as a part of an IDL project that the whole school was involved in. Julianne can talk to you more about that because it was her school that was involved in that type of thing. That's just given you a very quick overview of some of the key messages and some of the possible ways that you could bring L3 into your secondary context. You're going to have a lot of time to discuss all of these issues after the comfort break. And what I would say are really useful, helpful documents for me on the National Improvement Hub. And I think they were quite easy to find. I just put a Google search in and they did come up. This document called Further Guidance in L3 within the 1+2 policy, which is really, really clear. We have got a whole presentation which breaks that whole policy down, and I'm quite happy to come out and share that with anybody that wants more information on this. I'm quite happy to share that PowerPoint with you as well. You'll get this PowerPoint, but the one I'm talking about goes into things in a lot more depth and a lot more detail. So you're welcome to have that, or if you want us to come out and talk to you about it, we're quite happy to do that. The other thing that I thought was really useful in terms of L3 is an audit tool. There's one for primary and there's one for secondary. It's just an A4 sheet and it's very, very clear, and it just tells you what you should be looking for in your L3. So it's a good starting point to take that forward. If you want to have a look at a review of progress in implementing the 1+2 policy, ADES put together a report last year which was at the midway point, where they looked at 8 different local authorities and what was happening across those local authorities in terms of where are we now and where do we need to go to move this forward. So that's quite an interesting document if you want to have a wee look at that as well. On our own website there are some L3 case studies. These at the moment are being refreshed. Julianne has been out in lots of different schools in the last few months, talking to pupils, talking to teachers, and those case studies will be available on the SCILT website August, September time, hopefully. There are some existing ones there, again, if you want to have a look at them. I think what we have to remember is there's lots of different national priorities at the moment. Modern languages sits at the heart of them all. And I think it's important not to see this as separate things. They're all intertwined, and we can put modern languages right in the centre of them. It will bring our subject back centre stage. I just want to say a couple of things about the 1+2 Language Leadership Programme which SCILT is running. This has been revamped and reworked, so it's an updated version of what was Train the Trainer. They're going to be looking at things like the National Picture, National Improvement Framework and the Scottish Attainment Challenge and how 1+2 helps address those burning issues. We're going to be looking at strategic leadership in language planning and evaluation, progression in language learning, so you see it's all these key words at the moment. Parental and wider engagement in language learning. There's a lot of really good stuff going on with parental involvement just now. Raising attainment, developing literacy skills across languages. Existing models for L3 and diversity of languages. Supporting bilingual learners. And inclusive practice in languages. So that programme will cover all of those burning priorities at the moment. It's a free course run by SCILT and Education Scotland. It does have professional recognition from the GTCS. If you wish to sign up, the closing date's passed, but I'm quite sure if we've still got spaces, you'll still be able to sign up. It's the first week of the summer holidays, so the 3rd to the 7th of July, based here in Glasgow at the University of Strathclyde. There's 2 free places for each local authority. So you really need to contact your QIO to see if those places have been taken up or if there's still space available. And there is Emma McLean's email address. Emma is here today. She was doing the registration for the event. Once you've spoken to your QIO, register with Emma as soon as you possibly can. And you'll get further details on that from the SCILT website. And I'm nearly done. I'll give you a minute to read that. I stole that from Fiona Pate. It comes from Apollinaire, and I think it really sums up where we are as teachers. And I can say that because I'm a teacher myself. Change is always something that is difficult to embrace sometimes. I started teaching in 1983. I have seen and taught every national qualification that ever existed. Right back to the days, those of you who may remember alternative O grade, when you were sitting sweating in the language lab in case it broke down, because the pupils had to talk to 6 pictures and tell a story. And I remember a student once saying to me, "Do you know, it's been nothing but change in the last 3 years since I started teaching." And I said, "You need to go over that, because I've been teaching for, at that point, 28 years or whatever it was, and I've seen nothing but constant change." And sometimes we put the barriers up. We think, I can't do that because X, Y, and Z. As we've said, this is a challenging policy. We know the barriers. We know we've got staffing issues. We know we've got funding issues. We know we've got issues of time. But let's take this opportunity to put modern languages back centre stage. Let's take this opportunity to find solutions to the changes. It is an ambitious programme, but by goodness, I think we could really fly if we really embrace this. Oops, that's my contact details and Julianne's. We're here to help and support you in any way we can. Please get in touch with anything at all that you want to ask us, or if you want us to come out and go through this in greater detail, we're more than happy to do that. That's what our role is. We're very lucky that we do have a national body with responsibility for modern languages. I can't really quite imagine a national body that focused solely on maths, but then that's another conversation. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you for your patience and bearing with me.